Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take your sources, all the material you send us, and we really unpack it, looking for those fascinating insights.
Exactly. We comb through it, find the core ideas, and try to make sense of why they matter.
And today, wow, we've got a stack of material you shared, all focusing on one of history's giants, the Mughal Empire.
It's a huge subject, right?
Yeah.
Centuries of rule, a vast area. Your sources give us a great starting point, hitting their origins, their rise, their peak, and the inevitable decline.
So that's our mission for this deep dive,
Yep.
understanding that whole arc. How did this dynasty, which wasn't even originally from India, manage to rule for so long? What was their secret sauce, so to speak?
And what went wrong in the end? It's a story packed with, well, everything. Big personalities, amazing achievements, crucial turning points.
All right, let's get into the material you've put together. Starting right at the beginning seems logical.
Definitely. And one of the first things that jumps out from your sources is, like you said, they weren't from India. They came from outside.
Yeah, that's pretty fundamental, isn't it? Central Asia. And their heritage, as your notes highlight, is really unique. Mongol.
That mix is crucial. They trace their line back to Genghis Khan on one side and Timur or Tamerlane on the other. That's quite the lineage.
You're not kidding. Mongol military prowess and Timurid administrative sort of traditions all blending together.
Right, mixed later with Persian culture and Islam. Their original home, the sources say, was the Fergana Valley, Central Asia.
So the big question is, how does someone from there end up conquering northern India? Which brings us to the founder, Babur.
Exactly. Babur. He was a Timurid prince, trying to make his way in a very competitive Central Asia. Your sources mention he had a tough time, faced setbacks.
Which basically pushed him to look elsewhere, towards India.
That's the picture painted here. He heads east, comes through the Khyber Pass, which is itself historic.
And then comes the moment, 1526, Panipat.
Yes, the first Battle of Panipat. Babur versus Ibrahim Lodi, the Sultan of Delhi. Your sources are clear. This wasn't just a battle, it was the battle.
It sounds like a total game changer. Winning that single fight basically established Mughal rule almost overnight.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It cracked open the door. But Babur didn't stop there. Your notes mention he fought more key battles right after.
Yeah, Kanwa in 1527 against the Rajputs.
Right, against Rana Sangha and the Rajput Confederacy, and then Gagra in 1529 against Afghan chiefs. He had to consolidate quickly, secure that foothold before he died just a few years later.
So Babur kicks things off, lays the foundation. But the empire we usually picture, the one with the Taj Mahal and centuries of rule, that really grew under his successors, especially Akbar.
Absolutely. Babur's son Humayun had a pretty rocky reign, actually lost the throne for a while. But then comes Akbar, reigning from, 1556 to 1605, nearly 50 years.
And the material you provided paints him as much more than just a conqueror, an administrator, a visionary.
He really seems to be. Your sources go into detail about his administrative reforms.
Yeah.
A very efficient, centralized system.
The Mansabdari system, right. Can you unpack that a bit? It sounds important.
Yeah, it really was. It wasn't just a title. Your sources explain it as this hierarchy for both military and civil officials. Each Mansabdar got a rank, a Mansab.
Okay.
And that rank determined everything. Their status, their pay, and crucially, how many troops they had to maintain for the empire. It was a clever way to organize the nobility and keep them loyal, while also ensuring military readiness.
Wow, okay. That sounds incredibly structured for the time. And the sources also mention land revenue reforms with Raja Todarmal.
Yes, aiming for a fairer, more predictable tax system based on measuring land, checking productivity. This regular income was vital, paying for the army, the administration, all those grand building projects later on.
But the thing about Akbar that really seems to stand out in your sources is his religious policy. Suliku.
Suliku, yeah, peace to all. This is pretty radical. Remember, they were ruling a huge non-Muslim majority.
So what did he actually do?
Well, your sources list specific things. He got rid of the jizya tax, the tax on non-Muslims. That was huge. And he set up this Ibadat Khana, a house of worship, where he'd invite scholars from different faiths, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jains, Zoroastrians, to debate and discuss.
So it wasn't just putting up with other religions, it was actively engaging with them.
Exactly. And the sources suggest this is really important. It helped build loyalty, reduced conflict. By bringing Hindus, for instance, into high positions in government and the army, he made the empire feel more inclusive. It broadened his support base massively.
That makes a lot of sense. You can't just rule by force forever, especially somewhere that diverse. And your notes also mention a flowering of arts and culture under Akbar.
Oh, definitely. Miniature painting, music, literature, they all flourished. and Persian became the official court language, which had a huge influence across the empire.
Okay, so Akbar sets this incredible standard. What about the emperors who followed? The sources mention Jahangir briefly.
Jahangir, Akbar's son, yeah. He seems to have largely maintained stability and was known as a patron of the arts, especially painting.
And then Shah Jahan. Even people who don't know much Mughal history know Shah Jahan.
Right, because of the architecture. Your sources definitely highlight this as the absolute peak. The Taj Mahal, obviously.
Obviously.
But also the Red Fort in Delhi, parts of Fatehpur Sikri, Humayun's Doom as an influence, the Shalimar Gardens. These buildings weren't just pretty, they were symbols. Power, wealth, refined taste. Huge statements.
And then the last of the great Mughals, as they're sometimes called, Aurangzeb. Your sources say he expanded the empire to its largest size.
He did. His reign from 1658 to 1707 saw massive conquests, especially in the Deccan, in the south. The empire was geographically enormous under him.
Well, I sense a but coming.
Well, yes. Your sources make a really crucial point here. While Aurangzeb expanded the territory, his reign is also seen as the time when the problems really started. The seeds of decline were sown then.
Before we get into the decline, though, let's just pause on that success. How did they manage it for so long? 3 centuries, ruling such a complex region. Your sources must offer some key reasons.
They do. It boils down to a few core things. First, military power. Can't ignore that.
Babur brought cannons and gunpowder tactics, right?
Exactly. That gave them an edge early on. They were also skilled with cavalry, siege warfare, and they used forts strategically all over the place.
Okay, military strength, check.
Then, as we talked about with Akbar, that's centralized administration, the bureaucracy, the Mansdari system, the ability to actually collect taxes effectively across that huge area, that provided the money and control.
And the cultural integration aspect seems key too, based on what you said about Akbar.
Hugely important, especially earlier on. Your sources mentioned things like marrying into powerful Rajput families. That wasn't just symbolic, it secured alliances and military support. They also adopted some local practices.
So it wasn't just imposing their will, but also adapting and absorbing.
To a degree, yes. And that connects back to the tolerance point, particularly under Akbar and Jahangir.
Making non-Muslims feel included, giving them roles.
Your sources strongly suggest that was critical. It built legitimacy, reduced resistance. Getting that buy-in from different groups was like a glue holding the empire together. Force alone wouldn't have lasted 3 centuries.
Okay, so military muscle, smart admin, strategic integration, and a dose of tolerance, at least for a while. That's the recipe for success. But then you mentioned Aurangzeb. Things started to change.
Right. This is where it gets complicated. The sources point to some major shifts under Aurangzeb that began to weaken the empire, even as it reached its biggest size.
Like what specifically?
The most cited issue is a move away from that earlier tolerance towards, well, religious intolerance.
He brought back the jizya tax.
He did. And while historians debate the scale, your sources mention incidents of temple destruction and a generally less inclusive atmosphere compared to his predecessors.
And the impact of that.
It alienated important groups. The Marathas in the Deccan, who became a major thorn in his side. The Rajputs, who had been key allies. The Sikhs in the Punjab. It fueled resistance and rebellion, basically undoing some of that earlier integration work.
Undermining that base of support. What else? Your sources mention excessive militarism.
Yes, his obsession with conquering the Deccan. Those wars dragged on for decades. They cost a fortune, drained the treasury.
The classic imperial overstretch problem.
Exactly. It wasn't just the money. It destabilized the region, pulled resources from elsewhere, weakened the core.
So, internal dissent growing, treasury emptying, that sounds like a bad mix. What happened after he died in 1707?
Well, that's when the decline really accelerates, according to your material. You get a string of weak successors, emperors who just didn't have the authority or the ability of the earlier ones.
And the court becomes chaotic.
Riddled with factions, infighting, nobles vying for power. The center couldn't hold.
Which led to that fragmentation you mentioned earlier, provinces breaking away.
Precisely. Powerful governors, regional leaders. The Marathas becoming a major power in their own right. The Sikhs gaining strength. The Nawabs in Bengal and Awadh becoming virtually independent. The Mughal emperor soon controlled little more than Delhi itself.
And into this messed up external forces.
Big time. The empire's weakness was an invitation. Your sources highlight Nadir Shah's invasion from Persia in 1739. He sacked Delhi, caused a massacre, looted unimaginable wealth, including the famous Peacock Throne.
Devastating.
And then Ahmad Shah Abdali from Afghanistan raided multiple times after that. Each invasion hammered another nail in the coffin of central authority.
And all this time, the European trading companies are watching, right? Especially the British.
Watching and waiting and then acting. This is the final act, really. The British East India Company, initially just traders, started to play politics in the vacuum. Your sources show how they cleverly manipulated the situation.
Playing different factions off against each other, offering military help for a price.
Exactly that. Offering support, getting trade concessions, then demanding territory. They were very good at it.
Your material points to key battles where the British effectively took over.
Yes, Plassey in 1757 is often cited. That gave the company control over wealthy Bengal. Then Buxar in 1764, where they defeated the Mughal Emperor himself, along with other allies. That really cemented British dominance in the East.
So after Buxar, the emperor was basically a British puppet.
Pretty much, yeah. Living in Delhi under their shadow and protection, with little real power. The formal end, though, came later.
After the 1857 revolt.
Right, the Indian Revolt of 1857, or the Sepoy Mutiny. Rebels rallied around the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, was very old by then. When the British crushed the revolt, they decided, okay, enough is enough. They formally abolished the empire, exiled Bahadur Shah Zafar, and that was it, 1858. End of the line.
Wow. From 1526 to 1858, what a vast sweep of history. Babur arriving, the glory days, the slow decline, the final flicker.
An incredible story of rise and fall. Ambition, brilliance, internal flaws, external pressures, it's all there.
So looking back, what's the enduring legacy? Your sources must touch on this. It can't be simple.
No, it's definitely complex. On the plus side, you've got this stunning architecture, the Taj, the forts. That's undeniable. Their administrative systems, parts of them influenced later Indian states, and even the British to some extent.
And the cultural blending?
Yes, that synthesis of Persian, Indian, Central Asian elements in art, food, language, music, it deeply shaped North Indian culture. And they did oversee periods of significant trade and economic activity.
But the negatives are there too in the material.
Absolutely. The violence of conquest, obviously, the periods of intolerance, especially under Aurangzeb, which caused real suffering and division, and, the sheer extravagance of the court, which could be a huge drain on resources.
Achievements and grandeur, but also conflict, intolerance at times, and maybe unsustainable spending.
It's a legacy that India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are still living with and debating today. Immensely influential.
What a journey we've taken, just based on the sources you provided. From Babur's arrival from Central Asia through the consolidation and golden age under Akbar, the architectural heights of Shah Jahan.
Seeing how that mix of military power, administration, and cultural integration worked for a time.
And then the unraveling. Aurangzeb's costly wars and divisive policies, the weak successors, the rise of regional powers, the devastating invasions.
And finally, the British East India Company stepping into the power vacuum, leading to the end in 1858.
It really lays bare the dynamics of empire building, doesn't it? Both the strengths and the inherent weaknesses.
Definitely.
So based on everything we've unpacked from your sources, here's something to really think about. How much of the Mughal decline was down to internal factors? Aurangzeb's choices, weak leadership later on, the empire essentially rotting from within versus the impact of external shocks like Nadir Shah's invasion or the calculated expansion of the British.
Where do you place the emphasis? Internal decay or external pressure? Or perhaps, how do they fatally interact? Your sources give evidence for both sides. It's a central debate.
A really fascinating question to ponder. Thank you so much for sharing these sources with us for this deep dive. Hopefully, this exploration has added some real depth to understanding the incredible story of the Mughal Empire.